Hey guys, just so you know, we've decided to go ahead and divide this episode into two. The dividing mark will be right before we start talking about the final dungeon. So I hope that you guys enjoy this first part of our discussion of the final chapter. Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Welcome to the end of the first game in this epic saga. We have so much to discuss today. I have so many emotions and feelings that I'll get into seeing this for the first time to bounce off Colin. But first, we have a couple of announcements to make.
Yes, we do. Here is the most exciting thing that happened to me in the past, month, 2 months. I found out just like 2 days ago that the two latest games in the Trail series are Hajimari no Kiseki and Kuro no Kiseki. Hajimari no Kiseki is being localized in 2023, and I was going to just wait for it because I didn't want to use the spreadsheet. It's a great product, but a little bit clunky. I wanted to just play the game normally. But some geniuses in the shadows have patched English into the game, taken the zero field spreadsheet translation and put it directly into Hajimari no Kiseki. And they're doing the same thing for Kuro no Kiseki. So long as you have a computer that is good enough to run it, you can play the game in English right now, legally even, because you can just buy it off of Steam. And that is just so much nicer. It's so fucking cool that I can play Hajimari no Kiseki. Like, as soon as this recording is done, I'm going to go play Hajimari no Kiseki. And it's amazing that I can just say that. So if anybody is caught up to the English releases, and really don't want to wait anymore, there is a way to do it.
That's a lot of great news. But first, we have an apology to make.
We do. So last week, we started off with this new practice of we ask people questions, and then we read out their answers or discuss their answers in order to start off the podcast. And this idea was given to us by a guy named Griswold. And if you are attentive, you'll realize that we did not answer his response last week because he gave it to us in an email, which we told everybody you could do. And then none of us checked it because we assumed the other one did. So we are so apologetic. I've already reached out to him, but we do want to discuss his answer to the question before we jump into the question for this week.
Yeah. So Griswold, the quest that came to mind for him was from Xenoblade 2. And it is the Ursula's Blade quest, bearing her soul. And it's about someone who's not human, but gaining humanity, gaining a soul, gaining the ability to interact and connect on more emotional levels with other people, with the main character. Not just do the quest, and that's it. But what's so memorable, so engaging about this quest is you come back to it throughout the sequence of the main plotline throughout the game. It's interactive and immersed with the other events going on. And Griswold said that he anticipated every new level. And whenever he made progress, he felt like Ursula made progress as well to overcome her own problems, and how rewarding it was to see someone grow with you throughout the course of the game. And that sounds like a phenomenal quest, a phenomenal way of doing things.
I really wish that we had read this when we were talking about this last week, because it would have brought up a whole dimension of discussion about the length of the quest. Something that's interesting about this one is that it lasts for, if not the length of the game, a sizable portion of the game, right? And that's really interesting. But we fucked up, and so we didn't get to do that.
And how a lot of quests are segregated from a lot of the main narrative. You do them in one go, in one session, often. For the most part, you do them, and then the quest is done. How many times did we see this in the Trails game that we just played? You do a quest, you report it, then you move on. It's rare to see something that comes with you throughout more than one stage.
I mean, I think the closest that we get in FC is this quest where you have to obtain somebody's stolen ring from the bandit camp, but you physically can't turn it in until the next chapter because of how the narrative works. But that's the closest that we get. It's just how the system is designed. It doesn't allow for these kind of multi-layered going through the world with you design that Xenoblade allows you to do, or like The Witcher 3 lets you do. I don't know if it's necessarily better or worse. There are advantages to having longer quests like that. It's cool, but you don't have to do it.
No, it's all about execution. And that gets into what Griswold dislikes about quests: to pad out the length, that are poorly designed and even more poorly executed fetch or grinding quest. Kill 5 monsters of type XYZ, get 5 types of material, whatever. They exist to make the game longer. You put on a podcast, it's tedious.
I'll say that sometimes I like that because then I have an excuse to listen to a podcast. I mean, we're making a podcast. We have to like the form somewhat. But no, I get what you're saying. And this is a complaint that came up with other people as well. It seems to be a very common critique that you'd rather your side quests have substance as opposed to just you do it to check off a box. Let's move on to the question that we asked for this week. Now, for those listening, I think we need to be explicit about when we're recording this. We are recording this on August 3rd, the Wednesday, at about 4:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which means that if you get an answer in after this point, we will not be talking about it because it's not in.
We'll talk about it next session.
Yeah, of course. If you send it to us, just as we did with our friend Griswold, we will read it and we will talk about it. Although that might be even more time from now, depending on how long this episode goes. We're both long-winded and we got disagreements this time. So we're going to have to go fisticuffs. But we got some pretty good answers that we want to talk about right now. Kevin, why don't you take the first one and then we'll go every other one.
So these answers come from Twitter. And the question was, how did you get into Trails? What made it click? What made it stick for you? Griswold on Twitter said that the games themselves, FC, SC, were on their own great games. First chapter, second chapter in the sky. But the series as a whole clicked after Cold Steel 2, all the way after that, because you had to wait 3 months for the third installment to come out. And after that, he discovered the series as a whole, and it just clicked. So I think this seems, I would bet a lot of people went from In the Sky to Cold Steel and then the Geofront translations after they got into the community. This intermediate arc is not unplayable after all. I can get a lot of the missing story and crucial plot elements from the later Cold Steel games and not have them be like, what's going on? Who are these people? What's this nation?
If that is how he played the games, where he played Cold Steel 3 and then went back and learned about the Crossbell characters through that, then that is proof that you can just not start with Cold Steel 3, but you don't have to immediately know about Crossbell. I'm not sure if that's what his Twitter says. Maybe he can clarify for us on that. But I will say that Crossbell is very special. And if it was him getting into the Geofront translation of Trails and Ow, of Zero and Ow, that really got him into it, then I completely understand.
I'm very interested in hearing more about what makes Crossbell so interesting and so seductive, because this isn't the first time I've come across this.
Yeah, it's going to take us a while, but it'll be worth it. I forgot how much I loved Crossbell until I started playing Hajimari again. But let's move on. So Chua says, Trails grabbed him at the ending of Cold Steel 1, but it didn't really click with him until that very important moment between Estelle and Joshua in SC. That's when the writing was absolutely slapping. Now, I reached out to him to ask him what moment that was, because there are a couple of good moments. And of course, I am not going to tell you what they are. So you will have to see them when we play it, but when we get there, I'll point it out.
So it's confirmation Joshua makes an appearance.
Yes, Joshua is in the game. He's on the cover, I'm pretty sure. So I don't think that's a spoiler. I'm like
it's not
100% sure he's on the cover.
Also on Twitter, Pork Bob says, as to when Trails itself clicked, I enjoyed Sky FC overall, but it wasn't until the latter third when I was pretty roped in. And after that ending, I knew I was hooked. I went into Sky SC expecting more of FC, but it so exceeded my expectations, and I've been enthralled since. I agree, it really ramps up in FC after you rescue the professor, and all of Gransold is basically on the edge of your seat. And with the ending, I agree. More later on, but I lost so much respect for Joshua at the end of this game with what he did, the revelations. I was so angry and disappointed in him. I think he kind of sucks now, but more
Well,
on that later
we will
on.
debate that because you're just wrong. But I loved the ending. But what I would say is that when I got to the ending of FC the first time, I mean, I feel so bad for my neighbors because it was like 2 a.m. and I screamed. I was just like, no. And I'm sure it woke them up. But like, it's a really impactful ending if you don't know what's going to happen, because you get into these characters, especially if you play it like I did, which was I binged it. I mean, what's something that we're doing now is we're taking it pretty slowly, which has its own advantages. But something that I'm looking forward to Hajimari is that I could just play it whenever I want and I could just get sucked into it. Anyway, so we got one last answer from our friend Kate. She says, when Trails kicked for me, oh gosh, definitely sometime in Sky FC. She probably started feeling really engaged during the school play section in chapter 2, but after that, definitely the end of Sky FC messed her up, which, like, yeah, definitely. She had to play everything after that. She thinks the school play section in particular is really great because that's around when Estelle first starts to re-examine how she feels about Joshua. The play itself is also just a fun moment in general and provides respite between the orphanage fire and chapter 2's intense end. And I think she's spot on here. We see really important character development between Josh and Estelle. We also get a history lesson, as we've talked about, and as we'll talk about today, about Liberal's relationship with the nobles and what that says about the state of the monarchy. And it's very light, it's jovial, it's very reminiscent of Final Fantasy VI's opera scene, where it's sandwiched between two heavy moments.
And let's not forget the amount of sheer gall it took to place 60, 70 minutes of an almost visual novel. It's all dialogue. You don't fight a single person in the main core of the play and surrounding, to do it all about who are these characters, how do they interact with one another, how do they grow as real people through the performance of the fictional frame narrative. And it's such a bold, brave step, but I think it worked so well for us getting to know Estelle and Joshua so much better.
I agree. Absolutely. So next week, or rather next recording session, because as we said, this might take 2 episodes. It's going to sound really stupid if we keep saying that, and it's only 1 episode, but there you go. The next episode that we record is going to be a retrospective of the game as a whole. We've been taking it chapter by chapter, but we got to talk about the game as a whole, which will include stuff like gameplay systems, graphics, music, the story that we haven't really been able to talk about when we're going through this narratively wise, right? So our question for you is, what do you look for when you're evaluating an RPG, Japanese, Western, or otherwise? Like, what criteria do you have? What's most important to you? Stuff like that. We want to get a multiplicity of perspectives. We talked about our preferences in our first episode on First Principles, but we're only 2 people. We want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, so get in touch with the usual ways. Trails in the Pod. It's our Twitter name, Gmail, trailersinthepod@gmail.com.
And we promise you, we've been checking the Gmail. We actually check it now.
Daily. Get in touch in the usual methods, and we are really interested in seeing what draws you to these type of kind of niche games, if we're being honest. They're not mainstream in the way COD or FIFA are.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when people ask me, as mentioned, I have a video game podcast, and people ask me what it's about, and I say Trails, they have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. I've never met anybody in real life that knows about this series, other than you, and I told you about this series.
Into the meat of chapter 4, and it's a doozy of a chapter. We begin, as is becoming the case, not with Joshua and Estelle, but side characters. So we see Chloe being led by Lieutenant Julia Schwartz on their way to the capital of Gransel. They want to get to the Bracers HQ there to get sanctuary. They're fleeing from an unknown force, but then after Lieutenant Schwartz stays behind to buy Chloe time, it's in vain. The sacrifice does not work, which how cool is that? Because we see Chloe get stopped by an unknown airship, and who comes out? Colonel Richard. The coup plotters who have led this mutiny, they've captured her for purposes unknown.
Right, and this is when Kevin's going, seems like Chloe's important. I wonder why she's important.
Let it be known, in the previous episode about chapter 3, I said Chloe is much more than she seems. I bet she's royalty because she said she's sort of like nobility. And what's sort of a noble but someone connected to the queen herself? So I called this.
Well, speaking of somewhat like a noble, let's talk about Olivier. For that man is all sorts of an enigma. So he's hanging out with Mueller Vander, who clears to be a close associate of his at the Erebonian embassy. Vander comes up and says that he's been tracking the individual that Olivier is after, which we know from a previous scene way back in the beginning of like chapter 2, right? That he's looking for Cassius. They learn that Jaegers had been hired, and then Olivier enters into some sort of a mini soliloquy about how the lead of the play is unavailable, by which we should understand Cassius, but the understudies are present, by which we should understand Estelle and Joshua, and that they have Olivier has confidence in how both of them will act. Now, he seems to be referring to some sort of big event that's going to be happening. It is unclear to me how much aware he is of the coup attempt, but clearly that's the event that he's talking about.
And this goes to show Olivier is more than he seems. He is not just the lecherous, quasi-perverted weirdo who hangs about. He has very high-level information. He knows very classified secrets about all sorts of technology. He is much more than he seems. And the knowledge he has of the general events and even some of the details, it lets you know that whatever his relationship to the Erebonian government, he is highly placed and knows more than his share of secrets.
So, Kevin, obviously, I know who he is. I am curious, do you know who he is?
Yeah, I
Okay.
know who he is because don't forget, I played Cold Steel 1 way back
Yeah,
when.
that's exactly why I asked, because so then we make a decision. Do we talk about who he is since we both know?
I will say this. When I first met him, when we go to Heimdallr with Class 7, and I made an offhand comment to you, like, what the fuck is this weirdo prince dude? Why does he get so much time? He's so weird. And you're like, okay, well, yes, but he's one of the most important characters of the previous games. I'm just thinking, how?
Well, now you see. So yes, clearly he's linked to the Erebonian royal house, which kind of adds a little bit of intrigue to this whole thing, right?
What if he died? What if somehow he died in a successful or unsuccessful raid on the Oriole dungeon, on Colonel Richard, or the boss actor? What would happen between Liberal and Erebonia if the prince was killed in an unsanctioned counter coup?
What happens if he gets captured fighting against the coup by Colonel Richard, who's doing this whole thing to fight against the Erebonians, and then he has this guy in his dungeon saying, like, see, clearly Erebonia is starting something.
It was so reckless.
And you know what? I think Mueller knows that, because if you remember, we're jumping far ahead here, but if you remember after the martial arts tournament, they're about to go enter the castle, and Mueller's like, you ain't fucking going there, and like drags him by the ear back to the embassy. It's because he knows who Olivier is.
He knows we need as much plausible deniability as we can get.
Yeah, Mueller is the smart one, but Olivier is the crafty one. So that's what we got going on there. But then we switch down to Josh and Estelle entering Grand Cell. And you brought up a distinction that I don't think is important, but you do. So let's talk about it.
So on the journey to Grand Cell, Joshua and Estelle are stopped by the army. Do you have papers? Why are you going? And he says, we're bracers. Eventually, Professor Alba comes and says, yes, don't you remember? You were going to escort me and all that. But Joshua and Estelle, they say, oh, we're not citizens of Grand Cell, as if that's an important distinction, an important component.
You are conflating two events. So Alba takes him down, they escort him, and then they're met by two other soldiers that question why they are out traveling when there's like a curfew or a blockade or whatever. And they explain that they did not know about it because they are not citizens of Grand Cell.
And brave. They would call themselves citizens of Grand Soul or citizens of Roland, of Zeiss, whatever, not or in addition to citizens of the state, the kingdom of Liberal, as a more high political identity. I thought that was interesting.
And I think that you are without basis, because nothing precludes them from also being citizens of Liberal.
Oh no. What I'm saying is, I would never say, and I don't think many people would say, I'm a citizen of Ohio, of Florida, of Idaho, or whatever.
I would.
I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm from Ohio or Florida or Idaho. I don't think normal, well adjusted people, Colin.
Well, look, maybe
But
look, no, maybe I'm not well adjusted, but I do think that a lot of people do have stronger regional ties than maybe nationwide. I'm one of them. I am a citizen of New York.
oh, I agree, Midwest, Midbest, but the citizen of state or city just seems like a bit of a relic from, say, from our perspective of the antebellum pre 1861 era.
I hear you. I just think that we would have to see more about like how people define themselves over and against the kingdom of liberal, which we haven't really seen. Everybody seems to just agree that they're liberalians or that they're not in the case of like Zinn, right? Or Olivier.
There's that digression. And then on the way to Grancel, one of the enemies you fight is a fish. I mean, there's no water, but it's still a fish. And this fish has a power that summons other fish, and it is super annoying to fight.
I mean, I gotta say, I was confused as hell when you were complaining to me about this because I didn't fight any enemies when I was first heading down that road, and you're just like big fish that summon other fish fucking suck. And I'm like, what fish are you talking about? I'm thinking there's a side quest. This is a extermination request, and then you start talking about Chloe, and I'm like, what does Chloe have to do with fish? And then I found the fish, and I'm just like, Kevin, you're right. These suck. I didn't fight a single one. I just ran from them.
Usually, I try to do at least one of every enemy, and oftentimes I'll grind if I want to get CP or a new level before a boss
Mhm.
or whatever. But this, I just left on its way.
How often do you run from enemies?
Oh, do I run? Never, because Colin, I do the cheesiest thing possible.
Which is what?
I just keep dying until the difficulty gets lowered. I can take it on.
See,
Like, oh, one of my party members died. Time to spam move until I get the retry option.
Jesus Christ. See, I use run pretty liberally once I get to the point where I'm basically not earning experience anymore. But I don't try to just make I did not set the game to hard and then continually die until it puts it on easy for me.
I will say this though about run. The enemy sometimes often disappears. And if you're trying to farm CP before a big boss fight, that can really set you back.
Sure. I don't think I've ever grinded for CP because you just earn it during the fight. But
Oh, I do it all the time.
okay. I typically try to use items that just produce more CP in battle, like the Gladiator's headband and stuff like that. But we'll talk about that probably in the retrospective or after we talk about Lieutenant Lawrence. Well, yeah, so the big fish fucking suck. We head into Grand Cell to talk to Ellen at the Bracer HQ because we have to remember that Estelle and Joshua are given a letter to give to the Queen, but they find that the entrance to the castle is blocked. People can't get in. People aren't seeing the Queen. The Queen is ill. Queen seems to be unwell, hasn't been seen in public a lot. So Duke Dunan, her nephew, is kind of taking charge right now. He's the one who is communicating the royal will, who's ordering the soldiers around and stuff like that. And he's backed by Colonel Richard. So they need to find out a plan in order to get in.
And what's this plan? The fighting tournament that's going on. The winner gets an audience in the castle where they can't go. So Joshua and Estelle realize that they have to be on the winning team. Not one-on-one fight like they thought, but the winning team. It was changed. So they team up with the bracer Zinn, the Easterner who is fighting alone. But first, I want to comment on something I found interesting. Colin, you may not have. Joshua and Estelle in the Bracer Guild HQ, they spilled everything. Mm-hmm. No regard for operational security. I made a joke how they're kind of gullible, but the game and the narrative, it's telling you we don't even entertain the prospect that a bracer could be bad, that they could be a spy and informant. And we see this is held out. They are right to trust implicitly the bracers. They all turn good. None of them are the mole, the spy. And it's really interesting how the game throughout FC, maybe in other games, it'd be different, but throughout FC, every bracer we meet is good. And I'm not saying this is bad. It's a really interesting facet of, for the other elements that were are told are good, the well-bred mayor turns out to be a huge thief. Duke Doonan is a lecher and a crook. Colonel Richard, who we thought was good, turned out to be the big bad. General Morgan, who we thought was bad, turned out to be a man of principle. These institutions, on a whole, are shown to be fallible and exposed to corruption, except the Bracer Guild. They are the exception.
Yeah, I think part of that is because we are bracers. It'd be kind of, especially we're being introduced to Liberl by means of being a bracer. And your father's a bracer who's kind of a driving force of the narrative. And so I think that you kind of need to believe that the bracers are good, because otherwise you're kind of thrown into, well, what do I do? But I will say, I mean, you're right that I do believe even throughout the entirety of the Sky arc, bracers are uniformly good. There is one game in which there is a bracer who is not good, who does turn. And I'm not going to say more than that, but it's really well done. And I think it has its impact because of the trust that's built implicitly in these games.
I kind of wonder if the Bracer Guild is so decentralized, if that's intentional, how without this clear, explicit hierarchy, yeah, we have junior, senior, A, B, S, and so on, but it's not like the state or the military. It's do good in the ways you think is best, living with the people you are protecting. If that's an intentional commentary on good and bad, I don't know.
I think that it is. Man, you really need to play Crossbell because they kind of talk about this even in the first game. Just to put a brief story short, you basically are part of a police unit that is meant to act like the bracers because the people have more trust in the bracers than the police. So they do explore those kinds of issues. But I would say that the Bracer Guild does have laws. It does have rules that govern their behavior. We run into this problem because technically speaking, bracers are not allowed to interfere with state matters. Somehow we find a way to do that twice as junior bracers. But hey, technically these are rules governing you.
Well, I don't mean to say they are anarchism personified, but they are clearly at the other end of the hierarchy, obedience, strict control than, say, the other institutions that we see, namely the kingdom and the military.
Yeah, for sure. So then we need to enter the castle, and we do that by saying, hey, Zin's still fighting alone, even though it's a team thing. This team thing was a change. Let's team up with Zin. But that only leaves us with 3 people. Who's the 4th? It's our good friend Olivier. Now, the way that he's introduced is fantastic, in my opinion. Basically, you enter into a bar to get a drink with Zin, and then you hear the piano playing, and it's still just like, oh, fuck. I know who's playing that. And he manages to worm his way in to be like, yeah, I'm going to be on the team. I can fight. I got a gun.
From a gameplay perspective, he fills a much needed role. With the high EP, can cast arts quickly, ranged AoE to some extent. He is the stay behind the lines, unlike the tank Zen, the DPS Estelle, and the flanking rogue Joshua.
Let's talk about these fights, because both of us recognized difficulty spikes with these fights. And I would go so far as to say these are the hardest fights in the game, even harder than anything I saw in the final dungeon.
I will say no. And I have a scientific way of measuring that, Colin.
What's your scientific measure? Let me guess. The amount of times you hit retry.
Yes. It took about 3 or so on hard, maybe 4, for the fight against Lieutenant Lawrence and the Spec Ops soldiers. But it was quite more than that for the final fights.
Sure, fair enough. We'll talk about those fights when we get to it. I mean, I'm not going to say that Lieutenant Lawrence wasn't difficult, but I found him to be manageable. I beat all of these fights my first try, I'm pretty sure. But he's flicking me off to the camera, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know, with both fingers to show that he really means it. What I found the most difficult was actually the fight against the Ravens, the first fight, because they can do something that I hate, is revive their party members. Not only that, but they can revive their party members with a decent chunk of their health. So you have to you can't just knock them out again. You have to concentrate on it a little bit. And I hate boss fights of all sorts that heal themselves. And I especially hate it when I think I've killed somebody and then they can just pop back up again.
I get where you're coming from. To me, I agree by stating that boss fights have a lot of health that you chip away, and it takes slowly, even if it's the same amount of damage you deal, if they have, say, half the health, but they heal themselves, it feels a lot less wasted effort if you just take it slow and steady, not, oh, I got into the red or the halfway mark, they healed themselves, I have to do it all over again. It feels like Sisyphus pushing up the boulder on the hill.
And we're supposed to find joy in being Sisyphus, but we don't, because Sisyphus's existence is inherently awful.
I refuse to imagine Sisyphus as happy.
So essentially what we're stating is we don't like Camus, and this is very existentialist, this game.
Oh, I love Camus. I can talk about the plague at depth, but this is not a Camus fan podcast.
No, it's not.
After we defeat Lieutenant Lawrence and the special ops soldiers, Joshua is a fucking douche.
Please tell us how he's a douche.
He's all mysterious about, oh, Lieutenant Lawrence. He knows what's going on. He knows much more than he's saying. This is a pertinent, relevant, direct situation. It's not, ooh, spooky man from Joshua's past who may set orphanages on fire. This is, hey, this guy is in our way if we need to save the kingdom. But I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to create more suspense.
I don't think he knows. I think he suspects. But it's not like Lawrence's helmet has been taken off yet. And he, by the way, does not see Lawrence's mask get taken off.
No, he suspects. He should be more forthcoming. And
so
I am a bit anti-Joshua.
What you want Joshua to do is to give Estelle his hot take. I thought you were very much anti-hot take.
Only when other people but me are giving hot takes. But
Joshua isn't you.
No. But in a more serious manner, Joshua isn't about just Joshua's past right now. It's about his safety, Estelle's safety, the safety of the kingdom, their chances to defeat the coup. They need all the information, all the help they can get, because this is an uphill fight. They are outnumbered, outgunned, outmanned, and this may be... What?
I don't know if you recognize that you just quoted Hamilton.
On purpose. But they are going up against an almost hopeless situation. This may be relevant, it may not be. It may be the missing piece in the puzzle for Olivier, or for Zin, or Agate, or someone else to be like, oh, here's how we can defeat him, or get him to go away, or whatever.
I mean, I think all of that's true if he definitely knew, but I do think that he's still trying to figure it out. We know that he has memories of a certain somebody from his past that we'll talk about, but he does not have to make that identification yet. And if he makes that identification wrongly, it can lead to a lot of bad decisions being made on the basis of that information.
It's a tough situation, but in crises, and especially in warfare, a lot more harm has been done by not having enough information than having suspicions and all the information that may be relevant or may not be at hand.
I mean, but how many military operations have gone wrong by faulty intelligence?
More than one.
More than one, probably 2 or 3.
Yeah, at least. Okay, Team Anti-Coup get access to the black folder via their reporter friend Neil. And it's the who's who of not the British peerage, but the coup plotters, essentially.
I mean, we got 3 people. We got Richard, Amalthea, and Lawrence.
It's the who's who, Colin. I just want to say all of them are absurdly young. Richard is the oldest. He's like 30. And I get warfare, you get lots of promotions, but he was absurdly young 10 years ago as a staff officer with a very high rank serving under Colonel Bright. Captain Amathea is in her mid to late 20s. It's another JRPG trope. And at least for me, as I gain more and more distance from the 16-year-old protagonist, I'm thinking, oh my God, the fate of the kingdom is in the hands of a pair of high school sophomores. Just kill us all now.
I mean, 16 is junior year, but I'll give you a pass on that one. But consider this, Kevin. Both of us are in our late 20s, going to be 30 pretty soon. Don't you feel awful that we're not nearly as accomplished as Colonel Richard? I mean, Alexander the Great conquered the world by the age that we are.
That's true, but we've done things that he didn't. Like, I have 2 cats.
and we started a podcast. So we're basically the same.
Yeah.
Through that Black record, we start to see a little bit of their backgrounds. For example, we learned that Amalthea was a rising star in the military academy. I think it's mentioned there that she knows Julia Schwartz. We also noticed that Lieutenant Lawrence is a new person, but able to enter at this incredibly high rank. And practically nothing is known about his past, other than he seems to have a background in fighting with the Jaeger Corps. And I think this is the first time that the game has explicitly actually talked about the Jaegers. But to just explain what they are briefly, is that they're essentially military bands. Think of condottieri from Renaissance Italy that you can hire to carry out different operations. And the important part is that they are illegal in the Kingdom of Liberl. They're not illegal in Arabonia. They're not illegal in Crossbell. They're not illegal in some of the more northern states, but they are illegal in Liberl.
Roving bands of mercenaries that, from what we're told, but not just small, impotent, hired guns, but at some level, they can have credible challenges to certain state institutions and actions. They are not to be taken lightly. And they sound, from the little that we've gotten, like uniformly bad people. They're like anti-bracers almost.
Yeah, like we haven't seen any, well, we've barely seen them at all in this game, but generally they're not spoken of in a positive light. Thus, the fact that they are illegal. Before we enter into another discussion of centralized power, because I know that's what you want to do whenever we talk about military bands, shall we talk about Estelle and Joshua dealing with these guards who escort them back to their hotel?
So there's a curfew in Gransel. You can't be out after a certain point of night. And this is when they go to the cathedral.
Yes, we need to talk about that because Joshua and Estelle enter into their hotel after being escorted by these guards to find that their hotel room had been broken into. And they get a note saying, come meet me in the cathedral. So they have to sneak out and dodge the soldiers to go meet who's ever at the cathedral.
That was so annoying.
Yeah, I failed that.
I kept going east.
Yeah, because the cathedral's over there. And what you're supposed to do is go west and then double back around. But one thing that I hate, and it's the reason why I started playing Live Alive and stopped playing Live Alive, is I hate stealth sections in my JRPGs. They are not designed to be stealthy. And I'm not a stealthy person.
It defeats the purpose because in most cases, and even still here in Chapter 4, if you were to fight the soldiers, you can't, but if you were, you would get CP, XP, maybe some items. Stealth in RPGs oftentimes is counterproductive. You miss out on loot, goods, money, XP.
And it's going against your training. The training of an RPG player is you see an enemy, you kill that enemy. Now, to be fair, there can be cases in which subverting that expectation can be a good thing. It has to be handled really well. It's very difficult to handle really well. Here, I will say I like how they handle it in the fact that they recognize that not every player is going to be good at it. So much like the battles, they make it less difficult every time you get caught.
And they start giving more and more very pointed hints.
Yeah.
Like, go this way, then here, then there.
Just follow this route, you schmuck. So we end up at the cathedral and we find Julia Schwartz,
who did not take up a sudden interest in the cloth, but she's there hiding under a pseudonym so she can be in on the ground where it's happening, get information on where Chloe is being held. Oh yeah, she introduces herself. She is introduced as Lieutenant Schwartz of the Royal Guard. They protect their family, the Queen and her descendants. By the way, I'm really concerned about Chloe.
Yeah, at this point, I'm pretty sure Kevin had figured out who Chloe was. By the way, this is the first chapter we start hearing anything about a Princess Claudia. Like, she's not mentioned before at all. In fact, in chapter 2, they make it sound like there's only one heir to the throne.
With Duke Dunin. So you kind of wonder if this was something they decided on relatively late in the game.
I do. It's very clear that Chloe is the princess when you play chapter 2, knowing that. But I think that their execution of it is really flawed because it makes, we'll get into this when we get into the castle, right? But everybody knows that there's a Princess Claudia, except us who met her.
That her marriage prospects are the talk, for good reason, of people who have an interest in politics or foreign policy.
We have a reporter friend who has seen her picture, who knows that she exists, who has met her physically in Rouen and didn't recognize her.
A reporter friend who is based in the capital
With contacts at the Royal Villa, who knew where she was.
with contacts so good he can get the black folder. Not even, hey, by the way, the princess is going to be at a school somewhere.
It's very rare for me to say that there is a plot hole or a flaw in the writing of this game because it's very well written. This part is weird. They did not execute this very well, I think.
So, to our audience, do you think this was a good way of doing it, a bad way of doing it? Should they have foreshadowed more about Chloe in chapter 2, even if they had just mentioned, oh, hey, there is a princess? It could be in a newspaper or a book or whatever. Maybe not direct to the player, but something more than, oh, by the way.
So we get into the castle, and this is where the big reveal is, right? We meet up with this dinner party, and it seems like almost everybody that we had met from our travels are there. The mayor of Bose.
So we see the mayor of Roland, who showed off the gem
the mayor
to
of
Joshua
Roland.
and Estelle. We see Mayor Mabel.
The headmaster of the academy at Rouen went. That's how chapter 2 was represented. We see chief factory head Murdoch from Zeiss, and I think that's it. But basically, representatives from all of the regions that have the most sway over the people are brought in. And you wanted to talk about this a little bit because we've talked a lot about how Liberl is a decentralized state, kind of, but it's also very centralized. And I think that this comes about from the reveal that we're about to have, where Richard mentions that that the queen will announce that she's going to abdicate in favor of Duke Dunan. Basically is a coup, because we learn later that Queen actually wants Chloe to become the heir apparent and all of that, because Duke Dunan is an asshole. Colonel Richard asks the representatives of all of these different regions to help him keep the people in line, calm the people down and everything like that. But I was thinking, these guys, clearly they don't like the decision. They have to be convinced about it. But what could they possibly do to stop it? And they couldn't do, I don't think they could do anything, because the only people who have control of the military is Colonel Richard. What the best they could do is hire the Bracer Guild or hire a Jaeger unit, and that's illegal. You're not going to do that. And the Bracers, I mean, ultimately that's what the Queen does, but it's not, traditionally speaking, you don't hire 4 people to fight an army.
No, they don't feel like people whose assent is needed for this to go off in the outlying areas outside the capital. Maybe that's because we've gotten to know at some level all of them, but not authority figures, but characters, people who give quest, people we come to know, and so forth. But from their powers, how are they described? Richard says plainly they are influential among the masses. They can, prevent any panic or whatever.
Yeah.
But how we've interacted with them doesn't seem like they have all that much soft power to this extent, where Richard tells them beforehand what's going on and he makes them stay. He treats them like, yes, coercive captives, but also my plan can't go off unless all of you agree, so I need all of you to support me. It just feels a bit incongruent with their stated authority. Like there was no one between them and the Queen.
So I do disagree with you on one thing, in that I do think that these figures do have a lot of soft power. Maybe not the headmaster. The mayor would have been better for that. But we see Maybelle, for instance, having very good relationships with the people in the market, resolving disputes. People turn to her, people trust her. Same with the mayor in Roland. Same to some degree with Murdoch as well. People come to him when they have the blackout, right? He has to handle complaints about that when he talks to Professor Russell. We're in this weird position in which Colonel Richard does not need them to actually do what he's going to do, because as we've established, they don't have the power to actually stop him. So the question becomes, well, what's the advantage of getting them on board? And the advantage for getting them on board is that it's a lot easier to pull off a coup with the people willing and, willing to go along with it, rather than fighting you every step of the way. One of the things that authoritarian dictatorships do is they have propaganda to win the hearts and minds of the people. Every system is built on consent, whether it's democratic or dictatorship. The question is, how do you manufacture that consent, and how much of that consent has to be willful rather than implicit? And so I think Richard is very strategic and smart in trying to get these local representatives on his side. And he ultimately does sway a lot of them. If he had managed to go through with his plan, having them on his side would have, it, number one, it would have happened. And number two, it probably would have helped him a lot.
He is really smart and persuasive. And I'm going to give a hot take here.
Go for it.
He succeeded to the extent he did because he was honest. He is not in this because he loves power, because he wants money.
No.
In an earlier cutscene, he says he was willing to endure the stigma of treason if it meant his plan succeeded. He is a committed ideologue. He is doing this for the cause.
Yeah, he's a patriot. I mean, and he's a patriot in the sense that he loves liberal. He's not a patriot in the fact that he is subverting the system. But, we can debate on how much respect for the system is required for patriotism.
He is willing to do what he knows is treason. And
yes.
He does not lie to himself.
No, he labels himself as this is treasonous, but for the better cause.
And he's really idealistic in a weird way, almost naive. And it's odd to say that because he is the intel chief, he is the chief spy, but how he sees the world, how he sees Liberal, there is no doubt in my mind, if he could do this without the coup, he would. If he could do this and somehow he knew if he were to die, but it would go on, I think he'd be willing to die if it meant his plan would be followed.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with that for sure, which is kind of evidenced by how he protects Estelle Joshua at the end of the game. But we'll talk about that when we get there. I had a point that I was going to make about it. So what I think is really interesting is that let's go back to our previous discussions about General Morgan. When we first met General Morgan, we made this distinction that General Morgan believes that we need a strong military and that you should not rely on the Bracer Guild in order to protect Liberal from external threats. Right? He's a veteran of the 10 Years' War. He's very distrustful of Erebonia. He's in charge of the gate that links Liberal to Erebonia. He's very much a pro-military guy. And at the time, we had said, well, Colonel Richard is different because he uses the Bracer Guilds. He cooperates with them. He's not as ideologically tied to the military. He's not as much of a hardliner. He seems more of a moderate. But if you look at the goals that Colonel Richard has now in this coup attempt, it's precisely for what General Morgan wants. It's the ability to build up Liberal as a military power in order to protect against foreign invasion. The difference is that Colonel Richard actually has a plan to bring that about, whereas General Morgan doesn't seem to, or at least we don't know of any.
The difference is one of imagination. General Morgan knows that they barely won the 100 Days War. And it was a close thing. They have 1/8 and 1/7 the population and military might of the Republic and Erebonia. So they need a technological leap, and they had it with the airships. But in a conventional war, they will lose. That is guaranteed.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying. That your nation exists essentially because the other two powers can't be bothered, or they don't see it as in their interest at the time. But if they really wanted to, they could take you, and you couldn't do anything about it. What happened 10 years ago was essentially a fluke and is likely to not be repeated.
So, Kevin, what do you think about Colonel Richard as a person?
I think he's fascinating as a person, as a character, as a villain. I think he really succeeds as the big bad. Well, he's nice. He's charming. He's not an asshole. He believes in a cause. He's idealistic. You can see why he wants the things he does. You can see how his worldview makes sense to him, given the crucible in which he was forged. And all of his actions are understandable. They're not agreeable or reasonable, but I understand the chain that led him from A to B to I'm going to depose the queen. I swore an oath. He's traumatized. He's traumatized by the war, like so many are. But his trauma is insidious. He's terrified of it happening again. And him not being enough. He's scared he cannot be like Cassius. He's terrified he won't measure up. And that's what leads him to do all this. Because he knows he's not Cassius. He's not arrogant in the way that he thinks he's the best. He's scared in a way that he knows or he thinks he won't ever be as good as his mentor. And it's such a fascinating take on a cliched evil spy person.
So I do want to point out for our listeners, and this will be relevant later, that Kevin here has just used trauma as an excuse for bad action. that perhaps having undergone some trauma, you can understand why somebody does actions that you might not agree with. Kevin, I know you don't say nothing. I'm just saying, put a pin on it. Remember that he said that. I have, but
Joshua.
but I have a question for you as well, because I think you're right that Richard can come across as very sympathetic and interesting. But you know who doesn't is Amalthea. Amalthea appears fucking evil. And I wonder how much more sympathy we would have for Richard if Amalthea wasn't there and we only had this kind of nice face that's being put on the coup attempt.
I wonder if she is there as a character to stop us from being too much like, Richard has a lot of good ideas. Why are we opposing him?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, we do want to not like the big bad, and Richard is the big bad. So as a narrative device, she helps us. She helps guide our feelings to the correct target.
So there's that. But also, I think it's really good because he's soft spoken, he's polite, he's charming, yeah? But he is doing an illegal conspiracy and coup. He is the velvet glove. There needs to be an iron fist inside for his plan to work. She is a necessity just as much as he is. I'm sure he thinks it's regretful what he has to do, how he wishes there was another way. But he's still choosing to kidnap an eminent scientist. He's choosing to frame honest, loyal soldiers devoted to the state. And she is the execution of his will. She lets his hands be more spotless than otherwise.
I think that's a good analysis. At some point, we should have a discussion. I mean, I don't know if we actually need to make this a sidebar episode. It would be kind of interesting to look at insurrection movements and look at the disparity between leader and right-hand man in terms of that. You know, maybe this is just us as historians thinking, but that'd be kind of fun.
Also in games, this happens so often. There is a reason the trope is called the dragon.
I've never once heard this called the dragon, but I don't really know tropes.
For the right-hand man, of the genteel, urbane, sophisticated person in charge.
Okay. Kevin, I do want to pick your brain on one thing because you were talking to me about it and we need to talk about it as well. You think the 100-day war is too short. Why don't you think it's plausible?
In brief, I don't want to get too bogged down in minutia, but 3 months for a war that seems to have caused not just widespread, or at least targeted, highly in urban areas destruction in amongst the civilian populace in a world without aerial bombardment, but to, without much mechanized, entirely mechanized force, go straight to the capital of the Kingdom of Liberal, occupy all the key towns, destroy most of the standing army in just 3 months. Like even the 18-month or the 12-month war, if it was a year or two, I think it'd be fine, but a bit over 100 days just seems too short to have these dramatic swings back and forth and to imprint itself on the national consciousness of Liberal as it did.
So I'm going to demolish the Bloomfield thesis by use of precision, calling out speculation, evidence, and historical parallels. Number one, we have no evidence that there was wide-scale destruction of any kind. The only episode that we know of in which there was urban destruction was in Roland, which was revealed by the Queen to be caused by Cassius Bright, not by Erebonia. So that's number one. Number two, you don't know this yet because you haven't played the next game, but we do have somewhat of an idea of the military forces that Erebonia used to invade, and this involved a lot of tanks. They did have a mechanized force. The airship is a good counter to that, but hadn't really been mass produced yet, right? That's kind of why Cassius is so good, because he could take advantage of that existing technology for the military. Number three, we don't really have a good sense of what happened to the military. What we do know is that the Erebonians captured significant key points to block off communication and then was able to divide and conquer, which is a pretty classic military tactic. And when you're doing a preemptive strike, like they seem to have done, that is good. You know, you can get a lot of ground that way. Finally, look at Israel versus Egypt in the 7 Days War. They captured a huge amount of territory in a very short amount of time. Technological superiority, which Erebonia had at least a little bit, is helpful.
Israel is a small country by square mileage. I'm looking at a map of Liberal now.
Oh yeah, by the way,
What we
look, Liberl is small. We just walked across the whole fucking thing.
but it took months,
It did
they
not take
said.
months. It's taken a month.
I think it's been longer than a month for FC.
I don't think so. I think it's a month at best, maybe two. But we just walked around an entire country. You can't walk around the entirety of the U.S. in a month.
But how much of this is gameplay story dissonance of you can walk, but it takes less than a day to walk from one major city to the next. That's 5, 6 miles. That's getting into suburb type places. 5 miles from where I am now is the heart of downtown. In one direction, in the other, it's still suburbs. Like,
I mean, clearly, yes, there's some sort of abstraction going on. But think about so you've played Cold Steel 1. You don't walk around places in Cold Steel 1, you go by train. They recognize that there are vast distances to cross. In games like Crossbell, in which it's entirely on one city and the surrounding environments, yes, you can walk all the way around it. But Crossbell is very, very small. But Crossbell is the closest thing in size to Liberl than either Erebonia or Calvin. I don't know how the Kuro games deal with these vast distances. I'll find out when I play it. The games do recognize these huge amounts of distance, which leads me to believe that if we can walk around Liberl, it means Liberl is very small.
okay, so I can see here how an airship can fly the entire perimeter of Liberal while stopping for 2 hours in a bit and still be done before the sun goes down. This is a Steam community discussion of how big is Liberal.
Okay.
But so you know it's small. It's 1/8 the population of Erebonia. I think 1/7 the military of Calvert. That was what Richard said, I believe.
I don't remember the exact figures, but something to that effect.
I don't know. It feels. I mean, these cities do not seem small. They seem like Zeiss seem like a major city of some sort
Zeiss was 2 screens.
in the story.
No, what I'm like, you compare that to Grand Cell. Grand Cell is like what, 3, 4 screens? More than that? That's a big city.
Heimdallr has 800,000 people in it.
It's difficult to compare that because it's a 3D game, so the scale is a bit different. Plus, you don't explore the entirety of Heimdall. You do explore the entirety of Grand Cell.
Yeah, I guess what I'm having difficulty with is a comparable. Like, if we could just get some population size or even rough estimates, I'd feel a lot more comfortable being like, oh,
I do think that data exists. I think we have to get to other games to access it. I could be wrong here. People on Twitter can point it out. I think that these numbers are discussed in Trails to Third, in one of the Star Doors, talking about what's going on in Erebonia, but I could be wrong. But definitely population estimates of some sort exist.
so I'm seeing here the population of Gransel is 300,000 people, and it's the largest city.
Okay, where are you getting that from? The wiki?
Steam community discussion, what someone says from this is from Cold Steel.
Gotcha. Well, we should take that with a grain of salt since we don't know where they're sourcing it from.
And they have a total estimate of about 2.8 million.
For the kingdom. So what would that be? The size of Rhode Island?
Maybe Connecticut.
Maybe Connecticut. Not exactly a big state. Anyway, I think we spent enough time on this topic.
Yes.
So after we deal with Richard, we need to go meet the queen. And the way that we meet the queen is Estelle and Joshua dress up in maids' outfits. And apparently Joshua is a fucking gorgeous maid to the point that Duke Dunan wants to fuck him. No, I'm sorry. Duke Dunan wants to fuck Estelle, but that's neither here nor there. By sneaking through by means of dressing up like maids, they are able to meet the queen, who tells us that Richard is planning to overthrow her, to put Duke Dunan on the throne. In order to carry this out, they have kidnapped Princess Claudia, who we know is Chloe, or we will know is Chloe. And she gives a little bit of backstory to Cassius's relationship with the military, how the defense of Roland went, and how Estelle's mother died, and how that drove Cassius out of the military and into the arms of the Bracer Guild. And as you note here, she claims that one of the reasons why this more hardline national defense faction of the military wants to overthrow her is because they feel that a woman is a weak leader. Even if they have a lot of respect for her, on the international scale, women are going to be seen as weaker, and so they think they need a strong male figure to lead them.
They respect Alicia in spite of the fact she's a woman.
Yes. And they don't have the same respect for Chloe because, I mean, to be fair, it's not like Chloe's earned it yet. She hasn't been queen.
And again, this lets you know the kind of people Richard is surrounding himself with to get this coup done. Unsavory characters.
Yeah. I mean, you need to. Savory characters wouldn't do it.
No. And I kind of like it. I kind of like the reason these generals go against the oath they swore to the kingdom, to Alicia as queen personally. And it's so low and banal and just bad that she's a woman. I don't like her. I'm a misogynist, essentially.
I mean, I think we should keep in mind that that's Alicia saying it. And I mean, I believe her, but at the same time, it's also only one factor. And I think that it comes out to more that Richard and Alicia have very different ideas of what their national security should look like. I mean, Alicia's idea is free trade and her personal diplomacy, which has worked for the past 10 years. Don't get me wrong. But it's also A, very dependent on her, and B, volatile. We know from the real world that free trade does not guarantee peace. It benefits from peace, and peace can bring about free trade, but free trade does not preclude war at all.
I get where Richard is coming from, how if we don't want to be easy pickings, we need to be more trouble than we are worth.
Yeah, absolutely. If Erebonia looks at LeBurle and says, that'd be pretty easy to take, then they just might do it. And they do it in other places, and hell, they tried 10 years ago. At the same time, if they look at it and say like, we got our asses beat, now Cassius is back in charge, they're willing to do it again, they have this type of thing, that type of thing, maybe then they don't attack.
Again, Richard is not all wrong. And I can see once memories of war have faded in Erebonia, they'll go, let's fix what stopped us last time and just do it for good. Right. Second time's the charm.
Especially if they have a government that really supports the idea of imperial expansion. And that's not a spoiler because you played Cold Steel once, so I should be able to say that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we get that, and essentially we go and rescue Chloe from the villa, right? This is kind of where I think the plot starts to climax because we see a coordination with the Bracer Guild, Royal Guard, and these different forces working together to get our party into the villa, to sneak in, beat up the intelligence division, and go rescue Claudia, who, bam, Estelle now realizes is Chloe all along.
It took her a while in the throne room where Chloe was being kept.
Yes. To be fair, I'm not sure that I would have reacted any differently. But then Josh Beal like, I figured it out a while ago. Yeah, fuck you. In this point, I agree with Kevin.
I knew. I just didn't say anything. I needed to brood.
Yeah, I had suspicions. So after that, Chloe, I think, kind of shows her chops as a potential heir because she not only says, we need to go and save her grandmother, she takes active part in the operation. She's not willing to let, others come in. So, by the way, something that we forgot to mention is that Shara comes in last minute. Apparently, Shara realized that there was problems afoot and came to save the day, which helped us out very much because General Morgan's daughter was about to be carried off as hostage. So Shara joins the party, and Chloe, Estelle, Joshua, Shara, Zin, and Olivier, we have the six of us, they realize, okay, we need to sneak into the castle because a full frontal assault isn't really going to work, but we need to save the queen. And they divided themselves into two teams, men and women. The men go into the sewer system in order to sneak in, basically create a distraction on the lower level. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard and the Bracers are going to fight the military at specific points to kind of take away their attention. Meanwhile, Estelle, Shara, Chloe will take the airship that the intelligence division possesses to fly up to the top of the castle to go save the queen, who is defending the queen, but one Lieutenant Lawrence, who reveals that he was holding back at the martial arts tournament. Kevin, how did you find that fight?
Well, I was prepared to do my trusty strategy of see the attacks, the orb weaknesses, and then, lose enough. I could do it. But then, well, you can win the fight.
Yes, you can.
But if you lose once, it's a cutscene.
So I didn't know that because I've never lost this fight. And another flip off. Man, I'm giving you all the kind of attitude tonight. But I do think it's an interesting mechanic in the fact that, so this is one of those fights where you don't have to win it, but you can. If you do win it, you get extra rewards. You get a little bit of extra BP, and you get a gladiator. I believe you get the gladiator headband, or you get the gladiator belt. One of those. And the other one you get from the martial arts tournament. But this one I really like because it is increasing the amount of CP you get every turn. And I love that because it just means more S-crafts, more S-crafts, more S-crafts. It's a really good way to like give the player that extra oomph of power for defeating a pretty tough fight. Lawrence is supposed to be hard. He is, canonically really, really fucking tough. But right before you fight him, he takes off his mask. And then we realize that this is a silver-haired guy, which we suspect was probably the one who helped the children out of the orphanage. I know Kevin wants to say and started the fire, but we don't know that. I don't remember if he did.
Billy Joel.
What do you mean, okay, Billy Joel? What does Billy Joel have to do with this? Oh, because we didn't start the fire. Took me a minute. I'm like Estelle. But we also know that this definitely is the same guy who saw Joshua and Estelle at the play. So we can reasonably suspect that this is the guy that Joshua has been looking for, which is going to be important for some revelations later on down the line. But at the end of this whole thing, he turns to the queen. It's clear that he does not have any animosity towards the queen. He seems very willing to leave. He doesn't seem to see himself on the same side as Richard and Amalthea. He doesn't share the same vision. He basically tells Estelle and Shara and Chloe that if they want to stop Richard, they got to go head down to the underground. Turns to the queen and says, you can't really talk to me because you know about the tragedy of Hamel, Hamel. And then he jumps off the castle, which is foreshadowing for a bunch of different stuff. Hamel is really important.
Forgot all about that.
Yeah, well, I'm bringing to your attention because Hamel is really important, and you'll find out why next game. But they're very, very important.
So one question I have for you, Colin. Lawrence is not in this for the cause.
No.
It's almost like a job or a paycheck or whatever.
Yes.
And he's not a quasi-sadist like Amalthea.
Correct.
Is he worse than Richard and Amalthea because he's so banal about it? It's so not who he is. Him and people like him, I can see how they could be worse than the ones who are doing it because they are true believers in whatever they're doing, or because they like to watch people suffer. Him, it's what he does. He doesn't think much about it after he clocks out. And that's kind of horrifying.
I think it is difficult for me to offer you a judgment on him because you learn a lot about him next. A lot about him. He's very important. And therefore, I don't want to give my opinion because it's relied upon information I already know.
Well, people like him then. People like this as what we know
I mean,
of
from the what we
game.
know of right here, yeah, when it's like kind of this mercenary-esque, I find that pretty distasteful. Certainly, I like him less than Richard, but I will just put out there that that is not really what's going on.
Okay, then, moving on.
I have to say, like, some of the hardest stuff is that, playing through FC, it is so clear to me how tied it is to SC, how tied it is to the rest of the series. And there's so much stuff I wish I could talk about that I can't talk about because I don't want to spoil everything for you. And it gets harder every time we do these because it gets more and more intertwined.